Hey guys, and welcome back to Mad About Skin. The retinol ban is now in full effect, meaning there are heavy restrictions placed on what was formerly the world's best-selling retinoid and our go-to anti-aging skincare ingredient. Whilst the ban was announced some years ago, until recently we weren't actually aware of the main reasons why the European Union and other countries of the world decided to restrict retinol so heavily. Well, we now have that information, so I thought in today's video we could unpack it all. We'll take a look at why retinol specifically has been so heavily restricted and also do a deep dive into what the future might hold. Sit back, relax, let's talk the true reason for the retinol ban. Now, in today's video, I'm going to share with you my own hot take on this, my thoughts, feelings, and opinions, but I want to hear from you too. Reach down into the comment section below and let me know what you think to the reasons behind this ban, how it's impacted you, and whether you think there might be some ulterior motives going on. Watch the end of the video and share with me your thoughts, because here on Mad About Skin, we are one big family, and I feel that we can learn so much from each one of us, and yeah, I just would love to hear from you. And like I say, if you haven't already, now is a great time to join our family. If you could reach down and click that subscribe button, because we are growing every day, and I know I speak for the whole Mad About Skin community when I say if you're not subscribed already, we would love to welcome you. Now, without further ado, let's cut that waffle and delve straight on in. So I'm going to split this video into various different segments, and I've listed all of the timestamps down in the description box below. So if you want to jump to one section of the video over another, be my guest. But we're going to start with what is the retinol ban, like the road travelled so far. So around 4 years ago, the European Union announced that they will be imposing restrictions on the over-the-counter sale of retinol-containing skincare products. At that point, it wasn't really made clear what those restrictions would be, so we all kind of just went about our business waiting for a further update. Well, that came around 2 years ago, where they announced that they will be banning the sale of over-the-counter retinol products containing more than 0.3% of that key ingredient, retinol, or if it was a body product, 0.05%, meaning, I mean, that is such a low percentage, it wouldn't actually do anything whatsoever. The same kind of applies with 0.3%, which is what's accessible and allowable in face products. That is going to be a great option if you're a beginner. If you're new to retinol, then a 0.3% will be a great place to start. But for everybody else, we're going to want more. You're not going to get amazing anti-aging skincare results from a 0.3% retinol. Everybody's going to want to move up to something stronger, and that no longer is an option with retinol. And I think what surprised a lot of people is why they went so hard on retinol specifically and kind of ignored all the other retinoids, which are equally as accessible and available over the counter. It didn't really make much sense, but I think now we have a bit of a clearer understanding. As a result of that ban, which was phased in over the last 2 years, some of the previous biggest selling retinol serums just disappeared. The Paula's Choice Clinical 1% Retinol, gone. The ordinary high-strength retinol, gone. We saw some products like Drunk Elephant, their retinol disappeared from shelves. And I think that's when people started to take this really seriously. Oh yeah, this is actually happening. But at that point, until very recently, we weren't really made aware of why this ban, why these restrictions were actually taking place. Now, there are some people out there thinking, well, I'm not in the European Union, so how does any of this actually apply to me? Well, if you're not in the European Union, I'm from the UK, we're not in the European Union, but the impacts are felt more widely. Because the European Union is such a large block when it comes to skincare sales, brands don't want to have a product in their catalogue that they can only sell in a proportion of the world. They want to go global. And so they're going to start discontinuing products that they can't sell internationally, reformulating them with other options, which is what most brands have done. Most brands have now switched to retinal, which is still permissible, isn't covered by this ban, and launched new products containing it, such as the ordinary retinal, which is one of my personal favorites. So whilst you might be watching this from the US, for example, and saying, well, these restrictions don't apply to me. No, but they have a knock-on effect because brands, of course, want to be able to trade internationally. And that's why we've seen so much change, even though it is just the European Union and a couple of other countries of the world that are actually restricting retinol. So what is the reason? Well, until recently we weren't sure, but the European Union have now announced that the reason they restricted retinol is through a fear of excess exposure to vitamin A. Now, retinol, as with all retinoids, are vitamin A derivatives. Vitamin A is a naturally occurring vitamin that we get primarily through our diet, through meats, but some vegetables also, and then skincare forms a tiny percentage of that, things that are topically applied to the skin. It's been known for years that excess consumption of vitamin A can be problematic, primarily for those who are pregnant or breastfeeding, but more widely it can have health implications for everyone. And I think this is something that is becoming increasingly well known and understood. So the European Union took the view that applying topical vitamin A to the skin could increase the risk of excess exposure to vitamin A, particularly people that are already getting a whole lot of it from their diet. That was their main reasoning, and I think this shocked a lot of people because most people believed that the reason the ban came into effect was a risk of sensitivity and irritation. You know, retinol was quite sensitizing, particularly on those that already have sensitive skin. Most people thought this was the European Union being overly cautious and banning or restricting something that can cause sensitivity. Not at all. It actually comes down to a worry of excess vitamin A exposure, of which a topically applied retinoid would be a tiny, tiny proportion. So what do I think? Let's talk about what I think and then come on to what I think the future holds. Well, first of all, I think this is fairly nonsensical, only because vitamin A exposure, whilst it is a very real risk, if you look into any of the studies into topically applied retinoids and the amount which actually gets into the bloodstream as topical vitamin A, it's minuscule. Most overexposure to vitamin A comes from ingestion, from diets, excess supplements, things like that. That's the real problem. Somebody slapping on a retinoid once a day probably isn't going to be a whole part of that issue. As well, you use so little retinoid, you shouldn't use a lot of retinol or any other retinoid. A pea-sized amount is all you need. Again, that's not going to be having a meaningful difference. If somebody is exposed to excess vitamin A, it's coming from their diet or supplements or other lifestyle behaviors, not from the retinol that they're applying to their skin. So it kind of made no sense whatsoever, which led to a lot of people thinking there was probably some intense lobbying from either healthcare industries or some of the big drug companies behind the scenes to look to restrict this, which will obviously then shift people onto prescription or higher strength options, which are then, going to deliver more profit. I will leave you guys to determine what you think the cause of that is. Personally, I don't think a tiny or minute increase in risk of vitamin A exposure is enough to decide to completely remove all, beneficial strengths of retinol from the skincare market. That didn't make much sense, but you guys might differ. And it also made even less sense because they've also allowed the rest of the retinoids to remain on sale. So it's not dealing with the problem, because if they think that excess vitamin A exposure is such a concern, you can still get that from Retinol, other forms that are available over the counter. So they've kind of decided to focus in on one specific thing rather than deal with the problem more widely. So what does the future hold, and why do I think it was just retinol? Well, actually, if you understand the workings of the European Union and their decision-making process, it's a long process. They don't make a decision, yesterday and then implement it today. This decision was around 10 years in the making. If you look at the initial studies that they did, you then look into the scientific community that they engaged with, and then they made, the legislation, phased it in. This is a 10-year process. And so 10 years ago, Retinol and other over-the-counter retinoids weren't really a thing. It was retinol or nothing. And so I think the reason why it's only focused down on retinol is because 10 years ago when they started this process, other options just weren't really available, so weren't a concern. Of course, in the 10 years, a lot has happened. And I'm sure, the European Union legislators, decision makers probably wish that if they had their time to go back, they will probably come up with better legislation that looks less gappy than this. But you work with the information you have at the time. And I think that's probably where things stemmed from, and why retinol, for example, wasn't included in this ban. So this has got people thinking, well, what about the future? Well, the European Union, alongside some other countries of the world, to be fair, have started processes of looking into retinol and looking into how they can better manage retinol use. Again, this isn't going to be an instant thing. This is something that's probably going to be phased in over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. So I certainly won't be panicking, even though I love my retinol. But it is something that's going to be looked into. I feel this is quite late to the party. If you're really worried about excess vitamin A exposure, kind of that ship sailed by the time they get around to making a decision on other over-the-counter things. But I think that's the direction of travel in the future. People will be looking more at other over-the-counter retinoids and how they impact the skin, absorption rates and things like that. For me, I actually think the European Union have probably done us a favour, because brands were being lazy. They were formulating with retinol, even though it wasn't the best option, because it was the easiest, the cheapest, and the one that people knew worked. Actually, retinol is shown in all the studies to be far more effective than retinol and less sensitizing on the skin. It is just a no-brainer to move from retinol to retinal. People were reluctant to do it. They like to stick with what they knew, but now the European Union has kind of made that decision for us. And I think we should thank them for that, because now sales of retinol have plummeted. Retinol is barely registering in terms of anti-aging sales, and retinal has skyrocketed. As a result, all our skins are probably breathing a sigh of relief, getting greater results, fewer side effects and irritation. And so, whilst I don't necessarily buy the reasons for this ban and these heavy restrictions, I think the outcome, at least from a skincare perspective, probably has been a positive thing. So, you know what? The law of unintended consequences, I guess. What do you think? Now we know the truth as to why this ban was implemented. Do you buy that? Do you think it's a bit heavy-handed? Do you actually think, you know, as you're using retinol, you have nothing to lose, so it kind of... What do you think? Share your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below, because here at Mad About Skin, we're one big family, and I think we can all share our thoughts and opinions in a non-judgmental way, and I would just love to hear from you. I'm getting ready. I'm going to brew a cup of tea now. I'm going to sit down, edit this video, and then wait for the comments to come in so I can respond to each and every one of you, and just, yeah... I feel like we've gone full circle. We've been speaking about this retinol ban on the channel for the past 2 years. We've now come full circle, and hopefully we can just close that circle together and we know exactly where we stand. Let me know your thoughts, like and follow for more. Take care. Bye.